We are up to step 7 of the Eightfold Path, which means one more to go after tonight, okay? Now for the first time, we're going to do a really quick review, but I've erased 2 through 6. Because in some ways, right view is pin the tail on the donkey. You know that game? Where you spin the kids around and then they gotta, with a blindfold on, go pin the tail on the donkey. That's the name of the game. The most important aspect of that game is what? Get them headed in the right direction, or it's pin the tail on grandma or something like that, okay? So as long as they're headed in the right direction, they're gonna get pretty close to the donkey. In many ways, pin the tail on donkey is right view, in nothing but the best of ways. Because right view is gonna orient you in the right direction. Just the Four Noble Truths itself. The idea that suffering is caused by our attachments to things. That's sufficient. And if you just work on that, that's probably enough to get you going in the right direction. In many ways, that's exactly what Buddha did. And from that, everything else followed, okay? So right view, again, super quickly, quick review. I've just got 2 different concepts to get right view. One is let it go, right? Learn how to let things go. Go with the flow, right? We have to. In general mental health, learning how to let things go is terribly important. You know, acceptance, just being present in those types of things. And trying to control the nature of the world, good luck with that. So just let it go, that's part of right view. And then love another as oneself, that's a very important part of right view. Recognizing that we're all in the same team ultimately, okay? The idea of two but not two, eshofuni, or the yin and yang being one thing even though it's 2 things. That's the idea that the acorn and the oak tree are the same thing in different stages of development. Well, as a humanity, a spiritual humanity, we're all in the same thing, but in different stages of development. And that's super important for right view to get through all of this, to get to stage 8 and step 8 and really master it, is to embrace right view. And that's enough. Much of what 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are, much of it is to really emphasize and get good at number 1. And of course, they all have their own important pieces to it. That's why we did videos on all of them, so you can go back and look at all that. But a lot of it is you get right view, that's pretty good, and that's much of it. Then we get the right focus, and that's going to be today's, what we're going to be talking about today. But in order to really get all of this and to understand 7, I want you to understand the concept of the temporary suspension of disbelief. If you've ever heard of that before, it came from an English poet and philosopher by the name of Samuel Taylor Coleridge. I think he wrote the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And when he was in his prime, he talked about how important it was, especially when you're viewing theater, to temporarily suspend disbelief. What does that mean? When you're watching a show, don't sit there with critical analysis, nitpicking every aspect of it, talking about how unlikely that is, or that's not how it goes. You'll miss the point in many ways. So Coleridge popularized the idea of the suspension of disbelief. Now, in a minute, I'm going to talk about how we do that all the time, but it's very important, ultimately, to get the 8 steps, all 8 steps, to suspend disbelief. Because to get to the sweet spot, like we talked about last time, of right effort, is to end up trusting this process. In many ways, this is what Christianity is about, too. Even though you don't understand it, trusting it matters a lot. And you'll see a lot of that coming up with something called the 5 hindrances, okay? But more importantly, direct therapeutic application of the suspension of disbelief we do on a regular basis when we go to a movie. Can you tell how this is a movie theater? Hopefully. So here I have action adventure on a screen. What's happening in this?
Someone's getting shot.
There you go, okay? Someone's shooting someone else. And I have 3 people. This is like Mystery Science Theater. You know what that is? I got 3 people. And here, this one just has lots of hair. This one hair falls to the side, and that's the bald guy, okay? 3 people are sitting there watching this movie, okay? And in this particular scene, you got someone shooting at someone else. Now, I did a video on this earlier. I'll link the people who are watching this online to that video if they want to see more of it. But the basic idea is this. Imagine you're sitting in the middle of 2 people, and the guy on your left is totally aware that this is a movie. He knows that nothing's actually happening. It's just some recording of actors. It's not really a shooting, and it's fake, right? And as a result, the whole time he's sitting there saying, this is boring. It's not really happening. These are just actors, right? Nobody actually got shot. Wouldn't you turn to that person and say, shush, I'm trying to enjoy the movie, right? But to the opposite extreme, you have someone on the right who totally gets sucked into all of it, totally believes every aspect of it, and starts screaming when they see the shooting, call the cops, someone call the cops, or it gets so wild that they stand up with their own gun. And then they start shooting too, right? Because don't you guys see? Look at all this. Look at the chaos on the screen. And that person believes it too much. Now, which person's more annoying? Granted, I don't want the guy staying up with a gun. Okay, fair. But aren't they both annoying? Do you want to sit next to someone who believes it too much? Or you want to sit next to someone who doesn't believe it at all? See, this is what we're in. We're in an illusion, as Einstein and the Buddha both say. We're in an illusion of some sort. And in a little bit, we'll talk about why it's important. One of the 7 factors of awakening is actually studying this concept. What does it mean it's an illusion? Well, we're in an illusion that can be likened unto a movie. The Buddha, the word Buddha means to wake up. His name was Siddhartha. Much like Jesus' last name isn't Christ, Siddhartha became awakened, and so he's known as the Buddha. And what did he realize? Part of that process? That this is just a movie. Now, it's an important thing. Just when you learn that it's a movie, that it's an illusion, you shouldn't be like the person, oh, this is boring. What a waste of time. It doesn't matter. That's not it. It's not going to get you out of Dodge either, okay? It's not sufficient to just recognize that it's an illusion, so therefore I don't have to do anything. You also don't want to live like most of us live most of our lives by buying into it way too much, okay? By totally falling for it and missing the idea that it's an illusion. And so the goal is temporary suspension of disbelief, because you have to give it up for a while and then end up observing. The right focus is what we're going to be talking about today, is to observe the world correctly. And it's not to observe it such that it's such an illusion I don't have to participate, but also don't observe it so that you're too sucked in and you forget who you really are. You don't want to do either of those things, okay? So last week we talked about right effort and the sweet spot of not too hot, not too cold. And that's a lot of what that is. If you realize you are in a temporary experience, you're having a temporary experience of a physical illusion and that we're eternal spiritual beings, we're going to address that because the Buddha does not talk about the eternal soul, okay? We're going to address that at the very end, why I believe he didn't talk about that. Anyhow, in order to play the game correctly and really experience the peace, it's sitting in a movie theater, appreciating the movie, but still allowing yourself to get sucked into it. Isn't it nice and fun to go to a movie and get your emotions, revved up on whatever kind of movie it is? But if you just sat there the whole time saying it's a movie, eye roll, that's no fun. But also don't get too sucked into it, okay? So that sets us up pretty well for right focus. Now that's the word that I first learned when I was doing the Eightfold Path for the first time. I heard right focus, but lots of step 7 for people, it's called right mindfulness. In many ways, it's the same thing, just like with step 2, right intention and right thought. Those words sort of interchange a little bit. These interchange a little bit. You'll see I'll use them a little bit differently. But there's a very specific scenario in that why this is important. And it's when we're dealing with the world that isn't doing this along with us, okay? And if you're working on the Eightfold Path and you're practicing the detachment of things and right speech and right action and right livelihood, can you control whether or not other people are doing that? And guess what happens when other people aren't doing it? You're going to get distracted by them if you don't have right focus and right mindfulness, okay? And it's super easy. I've heard it's either Krishna or Muhammad or both of them call it the swamp of delusion, that we fall into the swamp of delusion when we lose our focus. I know Krishna said that we are self-deluded hypocrites when we do so. When you know what you're supposed to be doing and you don't do it, self-deluded hypocrite. And look up Jesus, Luke 12:47. When you know your master's will and you don't make ready to your according to your master's will, you receive a severe beating. And that's Jesus basically, again, teaching the same stuff in his own way, saying, hey, once you know what you're supposed to be doing, and if you don't do it, especially Easter week of all weeks, if we don't learn how to forgive, what happens? Severe beating. So right focus helps us avoid that phase. Once we get to, and I'll do that down here, once we get to the awareness of what we're supposed to be doing, we better follow through on it. And the bar gets raised on you, just like a college football player gets invited to the pros. The game gets more difficult. Once you get deeper into this, game gets more difficult. It's set up that way. Like a tightrope walker, right? Better stay focused when you're up pretty high. The path is narrow, as Jesus would say, and we have to enter through the narrow gate. So you better stay focused. Well, there's a lot more to it, but I'm going to quote Jesus from a Gnostic teaching, that we should arm ourselves with great strength, for like thieves in the night, they will steal your possessions. Arm yourself with great strength, for like thieves in the night, God bless you. For like thieves in the night, they will steal your possessions. Well, that's an awful lot of right focus, because the vast majority of the people in the world right now are this person screaming at the movie, thinking it's real, And it's real in a way, but it's not real in the way that we think it's real. And the vast majority of people are losing their minds, and we've been those people too, and we'll probably do it sometime tomorrow as well, right? But right focus is arming yourself with great strength and recognizing that your mind better stay focused on that which we've been working on. And it includes mindfulness. So sama itself is a word that the Buddha used for all the teachings. He didn't speak English. And sama is, I think, a Pali word, which means right, but it has a certain kind of meaning of the word right. The type of right it means is in the service of. It's specifically intentional. The right type of focus, I mean, I could focus on this stick, I could focus on my foot, or I could focus on detachment. I mean, those are all types of focus. While sama focus is focusing on the correct aspect of focus, and that correct aspect of focus is in the service of freeing yourself from emotional pain and suffering. There's a point to this. This isn't just sitting back and detaching. I was watching some Buddhist teachers talking about this, and there's a difference between stereotypical American mindfulness, which is becoming really good at observing. But why do people do that? A lot of people do it in the service of the ego, right? I'm gonna get healthier physically, or I'm gonna get better at my occupation, and those totally fine, no problem at all. But it's introductory level, that type of mindfulness, introductory level to what the Buddha eventually teaches with sama focus and sama mindfulness. What does that mean? The end stage aspect of right focus and right mindfulness is detaching from all aspects of the ego. Remember, the Buddha was poisoned by a cook towards the end of his life. And good thing he was detached from the idea of his death, right? Or the idea of the ego. And he was more focused on making sure that the guy he was with didn't feel bad about it. That's pretty similar to Jesus on the cross. He wasn't too worried about himself. He was much more concerned with other people, and he taught forgiveness in that moment, just as did the Buddha. That's a lot different than sitting out in nature and clearing one's mind so one can go, shoot a free throw better, or get do a good job on a job interview. And again, nothing wrong with that type of mindfulness at all. And it's good for the body, it's good for physical health, but it's not the PhD program of mindfulness, okay? So right mindfulness is specifically done in the service of emotional liberation from suffering. Now, that type of focus is best described or thought of in the Buddhist philosophy as the 5 hindrances, okay? The 5 hindrances, last week we talked about the weeds. Remember the garden of ignorance and wisdom? Well, the weeds are things that cloud up our mind. And those types of things that we all get in our mind, those types of things, they're very common, they're very, very easy to understand. One is our sensory desires. You have 5 senses. Much of what we're talking about here is the 6th sense, a sense beyond the normal 5. Those 5 senses are constantly craving, aren't they? They want sensory pleasure or they want to avoid sensory pain. Well, those 5 senses therefore become hindrances. Because if what you're truly seeking is, emotional liberation and detachment from pain, your 5 senses are going to get in the way. There was a teaching I read once that said the best meditation of the Buddhist masters is determined by how many mosquito bites you have on your back when it's over. Because if you're really focused, you can detach from the fact that you're being stung, right, while you're focusing. Now imagine Jesus on the cross. What kind of focus and mindfulness was he having while he was being nailed to a cross? Okay? And what was he focusing on? The pure liberation of his being, but also our being at the same time. Right view. Okay? He himself had let it go, his own body, his own life. He wasn't worried about other people being mean to him. And he loved another as oneself. He was doing right view on the cross. Happy Easter, by the way. Right? And so hindrances, sensory desire. And if you get caught up in your physical pain, and again, normal, or any aspect of your senses, if you get caught up in that, we're going to lose track of the great agape love that's behind all of this. See through the illusion to that is getting out the sensory input out of the way. Then there's ill will, which is basically hostility towards others. How's the world doing with ill will these days, okay? We're addicted to it. Hostility towards others. The moment you start blaming someone else, now you're attached. And boy, you got a lot of work to do once we're up, if we're trying to work through right view and we're immediately attached to someone else's behaviors. Good luck changing that. And can you detach for someone else? No. It's a journey that we all have to do alone. And every person has to do it by themselves in a team environment. Notice the order there. Okay? So ill will, which is that hostility towards others or resentment towards others, we're never breaking free from the suffering if we still hold on to that. Sloth, which is another way of saying laziness. It reminds me also of last week with the right effort. If you have a guitar and the strings are too loose, they won't strum. Okay, it won't sound very good. If we don't put enough effort in, we're lazy, we're still not going to get there. It takes work. That's what right effort is. But it doesn't take too much work. We'll do that again in a second. If you put too much work in or not enough work in, then we've got a problem. Okay? Sloth is when you don't put enough work in. And that's a certain type of laziness. And again, we all get afflicted by that sometimes, but this is important. Does this mean you have to work on it 24/7? No. Imagine you're trying to learn French. What's required if you're trying to learn another language? 24/7 focus?
Using it.
Using it how much?
10% of the time.
Yeah, there you go. That's the number I was looking for. 10% of your day, about an hour, hour and a half a day of work will be enough to become proficient at it. Same thing with mathematics, okay? Or knitting. Pick your putting. Work on it about an hour a day, you'll get better at it, okay? So we don't have to do mindfulness 24/7, although that becomes natural after a while. If I learned French fluently, wouldn't I just be speaking French fluently? Aren't we speaking English fluently? Did you come in here thinking, having to try, how am I going to think in English? How am I going to speak in English? Or after a while, does it just click? If you were doing it, right? Hard for you. After a while, it becomes automatic. That's why I like to call it spirituality. It's a language. It's really what the Tower of Babel is about too, or Babel. And it's not a bunch of people speaking different languages. It's a bunch of people speaking different religions, right? And all of a sudden, we couldn't communicate with each other because we got that group of people disagreeing with that group of people over here on what God is. And it's not about French versus Spanish and English. Most of these are mysteries, right? And that one is very clear. So whenever we get caught up in thinking that I need to be doing more, no, that's the ego again. What's wrong with me? I tripped up. Well, if you're learning French, you're going to stumble over the syntax sometimes. Is that the right word? You might mispronounce a few things, right? And if you go to France, they're going to probably laugh at you for your silly American way of doing things. Whatever. That's okay. It's a long journey to get to this point, right? So again, it's a hindrance. Don't do too little, but don't do too much. It's okay. Find that sweet spot. Then we have worry. Can I do this? And doubt's right next to that. There's no way that the Buddha said that I'm Buddha too, right? And it's a little easier for us to hear that from a distance of the Buddha, who says in his first insight and awareness of revelation is that we're all Buddha. But in Christianity, Jesus said you are the light. He said the exact same thing. In fact, he said greater works than these you can do. Paul says we're crucified with Christ. I mean, all these things are metaphors. At the same time, they're literally true. You're the light. Okay? We all are Buddha. We can all do this. In fact, you have to do it, according to their philosophies in the East. If you don't do it this lifetime, next lifetime you will. And if not then the following one. But eventually you'll do it. Okay? And so we have worry and doubt about, am I going to do this? Am I even capable of doing it? I like to say therapeutically, the last act of the ego is to tell you you're still not good enough. You can't possibly match up to Buddha and Jesus. You can't possibly be good enough, right? So those are the 5 hindrances. One of the teachers I read said this: we are all greedy for fame, praise, and respect. That's largely true. 1, 2, we're all 3 of those things. And that's what the ego wants. It's trying to get praise from other people. And yet, that doesn't satisfy us, even if you do get it. I would suggest that Elvis himself got that stuff, and it doesn't make you happy. Being elected president, there's a lot of fame that goes with that. That's sort of mixed bag of respect, though, right? And I'll let you decide whether or not you think the current crop of presidential candidates are worthy of that. But you know what? I don't know how happy they are either. Our journey, right view, is to learn how to let go of all things ego. Right? To let go of that, to just experience the movie. In many ways, we are these characters, like Shakespeare said. All men and women are just actors and actresses on a stage. And here we are. In Hinduism, it's called Leela, the divine play. Spiritual beings come down to the physical world. We take on these characters. In New Eyes, we call it the costume party, okay? The idea is you're wearing a costume, just like my son wore Buzz Lightyear when he was a little dude. After a while, he finally took it off. Took about 1.5 years, but he eventually stopped wearing that costume. You'll stop wearing your costume too eventually. But it'd be so much nicer if you realized you're wearing a costume right now and stop judging other people for their costumes. You know, you go to a Halloween party, sometimes the messier the costume, the better in many ways. Why do we look at other human beings and judge them for the way they look, period, on any issue at all? What you're doing is showing your own ignorance, right? Haha, look at their costume. Well, that's like teasing Mickey Mouse at Disney World. Look at the giant mouse. It's not really a mouse. And so you know, through the way you look at the world, you know that if you are seeking physical world comfort, what you're doing is looking for fame, praise, and respect one way or another. But when you work on letting go of that, right view and all of this stuff, you realize, hey, you can appreciate your costume. You can appreciate other costumes. You can also not judge other costumes. Either way, you're watching the movie the right way, okay? If we don't notice, now right mindfulness is the quality of keeping in mind on a regular basis that these hindrances are always there, just like weeds, which I erased. Weeds are always there in gardens. They pop up. What if you start neglecting the garden? The weeds are going to crop up, and they're going to happen a lot quicker. So right mindfulness is maintaining focus that those weeds will show up. What if you lose focus? Again, what if you go out in public, like Jesus says, and you're not armed with great strength? And then weeds start popping up all over the place. The ego slips in under the radar. It is a very, very clever thing, that ego. It's why it's the devil. It knows how to get you at the exact right time. It's Achilles' heel stuff. If you have one vulnerability, it's still going to find you. Or in Revolver, when he says, wherever you don't want to go, that's where you'll find it, okay? Matthew 5:48, you must be perfect. You don't get to hold on to a little bit of ego no more than you're satisfied if the doctor removes most of the malignant tumor, okay? What about that 2%, doc? What's going to grow right back? If we don't remove the ego or tame the ego, it's going to grow back. So we better stay mindful of those hindrances. And on the flip side of that, part of Buddhism is the 7 factors of awakening, which are the flowers, and we're supposed to cultivate those things. And so you should notice if a pretty flower pops up, and then you should water it if you want to keep it alive, right? So I just wrote down a couple. You can research this on your own, but a couple of them. One is of the 7 factors of awakening. One is to investigate the nature of reality. It's precisely what the first 10 chapters of New Eyes are about, okay? And the idea of all the Einstein stuff, the nature of reality, is E equals mc squared. What does that mean? We're made up of energy. What is string theory? You know, on the lowest level of reality as we can understand and learn it, we're made up of vibrating strings. Your body's made up of vibrating strings. This stick is, this board is, everybody is. Do you ever walk around thinking of yourself as a bunch of vibrating strings? And we're talking like 100,000 trillion to the trillionth power. Okay, a lot. But you're music. You are music. We don't think of ourselves like that. Why do we like music? Of course, it vibrates with us. It literally vibrates along with us. And then we with it, okay? And so we are these physiological beings that are made up of light. How does the Bible start? In the beginning, let there be light. God made the whole world out of light, and you're a light being. And when Jesus says, you are the light, he's being literally true as well. Okay? Well, that's part of the nature of reality. That's one of the 7 factors of awakening. Cultivate that. There was a time period around 20 years ago when the internet came out where I wouldn't go to bed until I had Googled something like, what's the meaning of life? Or why is the world an illusion? That's me typing on the keyboard, right? And I'll read whatever came my direction. Back then it was less cluttered. But you could really ask a specific question and then someone out there had a pretty good insight or something that was to tell on the donkey. It's going to line you in the right direction. Okay? And so cultivate that factor. Keep studying the nature of the reality that we're in. And the science of the observer effect. And the science of entanglement and superposition. Why are there movies like Everything Everywhere All at Once coming out? Well, it's because there's producers that know they can make money off of those types of things, but they figure out what superposition is. Make sure you figure out for yourself what it is. And what entanglement is and how we're energetically connected to each other. Right? Study that. That's part of right focus. Then relaxation. That's a good one. That's part of the factors of awakening. And the Buddha taught 2 aspects of relaxing. Physiological, body relaxing, and mind relaxing. Is there a benefit from meditation when it comes to just relaxing the body and the mind? Of course there is. The most important aspect of meditation is ultimately learning how to focus your mind. So you could focus on what you want to be focusing on, as opposed to the distractions of the world. But when it comes right down to it, relaxation is a very critical ingredient, a part of the process, so you can catch your breath. physiologically and mentally. It's hard work otherwise. And it's why 10% is the answer. You can spend 90% of your day working on other stuff. The Sabbath is really about this kind of stuff, taking a break. Remember, Jesus mocked the idea of taking all of Sunday off. If your donkey falls into a well on a Sunday, would you go try to get it out of the well? All right? Oh, don't break the Lord's rules. Well, he's like, of course you're going to break it into certain contexts. But you still better take Sabbath, which is to take a break. You got to relax. Don't study this for the next 50 straight days. It's going to be tiring, very difficult. And one of the last factors of awakening is joy. Isn't that nice? And it's one of the very first things I've learned from Buddha is that truth works. Truth is effective. Practice things that aren't true, like drugs and alcohol will make me feel better long term. That doesn't work, right? And people figure that out pretty quickly. How about possessing another human being and making sure that they respond to my every whim? Okay, yeah, that doesn't work. How about having lots of money? No. How about lots of food? How about no money, no food? Buddha already covered this with the middle path, okay? Joy comes. The experience of joy comes whenever we walk the middle path, when we detach from this. It's automatic, as Rumi says. Like the rose, when it blooms, it doesn't try to release a fragrance. It just does. When we walk the middle path, we go through the Eightfold Path, and we reach step 8. Joy is natural. It's your divine birthright. All you got to do is the work to get the ego out of the way. So again, it's a major reinforcer. The more you do it right, the more you're going to feel a certain joy. It does not mean your favorite team's going to win the Super Bowl, though. Nor does it mean you're going to get the relationship you want or the job you want. None of that. In fact, Jesus was a horrible role model for this, if that was the case. Because, he died on a cross at age 33 without a family, at least not of his own, so to speak. And that would be pretty depressing if that was your goal, that it wasn't the goal. It wasn't Jesus' goal. And nor was it the Buddha's. Remember, the Buddha had a wife and kid. He was miserable. He left them. Wow. Right? Don't look at each other and judge each other for what we've done, right? The fact is the truth sits in all of us anyways. The Buddha figured it out despite his issues. Jesus figured it out. We're all figuring it out, okay? So joy comes when you do it the right way. So we'll start wrapping it up with this. Right focus gives us a sense of ease, okay? The sense of ease that takes away your idea of lack. You don't think you have enough. Well, as you walk the path, what just comes over you naturally is, I have plenty. I have enough. I have all that I need in one way or the other. Notice how that would apply to everybody in the world? And in that process, guess who becomes more generous, especially those that have? They're going to be more likely to be able to give it away. But those who don't have are going to be more satisfied with what they do have. And they can appreciate when Jesus says, blessed are the poor, the meek, and the weak, and all that kind of stuff. They're way more likely to appreciate this process for many different reasons. Because you can feel joy independent of money and status and power. And physical health even. That's why Jesus got himself beaten to death. Because if he just got a paper cut, that would have been not sufficient, right? The fact is he went through something very adverse to show us it doesn't matter your health either, physical health. Okay? So, right focus helps us ease our sense of lack, and it offers a profound contentment that is sustainable. I've drawn this little drawing many times. It's from Kabbalah, the idea of the desires of the heart. And in Kabbalah, there's 613 different types of desires that we have. And there's one of them, which they call the point. I've got it there in pink right in the middle. There's one of them that's a desire that will fulfill you. All those other desires, they call our nations, and those nations are competing with the concept of Israel, and Israel means to be connected to God. Isra, connection or struggles with, and El is Elohim, God. That's an Israelite. An Israelite is one who's connected to God. That could be all of us. We're all Israelites. That's if you believe in this process. And again, at the end of all this, I'm going to talk about why the Buddha didn't say the word God. Okay? Truth is, we all have that one desire. That one will work. Now we have all these other desires. Are you allowed to go exploring them? Yes. What does seek and you will find mean other than when you find that one sweet spot in the middle? That's the one that'll work. And when you come across that, you can go ahead and get addicted to that. That's the Tao flowing through you, right? And as you find that spot and you work on developing it with all these various steps, it grows. It grows in such a way that the brighter it gets, it's like the light, the brighter it gets, it consumes all those little dark spots around it. It's why perfect love casts out all fear. It's why I never talk about drugs and alcohol with my people in recovery, because it doesn't really help to talk about that stuff. What matters is when you add more light to the system, the dark goes away automatically. So what is right focus? The right focus is once you've learned this, once you've learned French, you can go speak it now fluently, and it's easy. Right focus is going, okay, that does make sense. I feel that inside of me. This is what all the prophets are talking about one way or another. And now your job is to stay focused on it. Like, really good focus. Now, will you spend some time in these other areas? Sure you are. But can you go over there and still come back over here because you know where your home is? Yes. And even when you're visiting another area, another desire, can you be grounded in the fact that you know what your life is really all about? Yes. Could I speak, if I spoke French, but still go back to English later? Yes. So can you experience all these other desires? Yes, but you have right view. You now know that the only thing that that you want to be attached to, the Dalai Lama once said, you must desire desirelessness. Because he was asked about that. How do you do this process if you're supposed to let go of everything? And like I said, right view. When the Buddha said there is no path in the Kalama Sutta, then he proceeds to give us a path. Right view is understanding that that's not hypocrisy, right? Right view is not understanding you're not being contradictory. No more than this person is being contradictory by enjoying the movie but not overreacting to it, okay? Right view is to understand that I do want to desire this one thing. I want to be attached to that one thing. But by definition, attaching myself to that one thing detaches me from all those other things. And the successfully doing that is why the spiritual journey in addiction and recovery is so effective. As people grow spiritually speaking, they feel like using less drugs and alcohol. That's what it's all about. Too bad we don't have AA for politicians, right? Or for religious leaders, because they're the ones that got to get into this, hey, we're all in this together. Let's get past our denial. They're all into the addiction to the ego. That's the problem. And so what right focus helps us do is get focused and stay focused mindfully wherever you go on all these various rules and grow those flowers again and again and again. So we close with this. Now, years ago, I have this in a video, a couple dozen videos ago, in which a phrase I learned probably like 2008 or so that I attributed to the Buddha was this concept, does not further. And it was said that the Buddha, when asked a question, if it didn't pertain to this process or anything close to this process, he would say that does not further. An example would be, who should I vote for president? Just like both the left and the right try to co-opt Jesus, they love to co-opt the Buddha too. And I assure you that Jesus and the Buddha, they weren't particularly interested in human politics. Jesus himself said to Peter, you're focused on the affairs of man, I'm focused on the affairs of God. That was when Peter was trying to stop the crucifixion. And if you look up the original, I think Greek or Latin word for affairs of man, it's politikos, okay? I think that's what it is. In any event, here you have one guy working on detachment, that's Jesus, and he's working on detachment and breaking free from all these attachments that we have. And another then demonstrated it on the cross, right? And both of them would end up saying one way or another, hey, that does not further. Now, if what you're doing is spiritual, if you're showing compassion with spirit, or if you're in church with spirit, that would further. But what if you're going to church to just impress other people so you can get your Christian of the Year plaque? What does Jesus say about that? He says, well, you have your reward. Your reward is the pat on the back from fellow people, okay? You don't have enlightenment. You're not born again. So why are you doing what you're doing? Kabbalah says we often do what we do. Outer giving is really inner-taking. We do things for ego growth. So things along the way that Buddha recognized did not connect to his teachings, he would say that does not further. Now, I've not been able to find where I read that. And if there's a Buddhist or anyone out there who knows if he said that, I'd love to have someone comment and say, oh, here's where he said it. So I ended up saying, I'm not sure he said it anymore because I can't find it, but it still works, right? It still works. I said it then. It does not further. If it does not fit to this path and it doesn't further, it doesn't really matter who you vote for president. You still have to go through the detachment process, okay? You're still going to have, no matter what, if the laws change against you, so to speak, if they changes against you, you still have the option to learn how to free yourself, right? That's how Jesus is the Savior. He guides you out of any situation you're in. It doesn't matter what circumstance you're in. Apostle Paul was in prison for teaching Jesus, and he was sentenced to death, and they decapitated him, right? And yet he said, I'm free. It's the guards who are in prison, okay? I'm free. I'm with Christ wherever I go. And that's available to you, whether or not you have cancer, or you're getting nailed to a cross, or you're in high school, or if you're a Democrat or Republican, if you're a Jew or a Buddhist or an atheist, it does not matter. Christ is in you. Once you know that, you might use a different word, What Shakespeare say, a rose by any another name will still smell as sweet. Your enlightenment process is unique to you. You figure that out, kumbaya. That's all we need to worry about there, okay? So all that does not further. Why did I say that? Because in my study of this for this particular lecture, I came across this teaching in which Buddha says many, many, many times that when you're walking the Eightfold Path, you should do these steps to the extent necessary. Now this one I know the source of, okay? And he said it many times. To the extent necessary. In many ways that's similar to does not further, okay? But what does it mean to the extent necessary? I will refer you back to our movie. You have to stay balanced, okay? The suspension of disbelief to the extent necessary to have a good experience here is the same thing as what happens inside a movie theater. You have to give up disbelief to a certain extent, but don't give it up so much that you think it's real. So that's right effort. That's that balance point, the sweet spot. You have to give up your ego to the extent necessary. You still should know that April 15th is coming, at least in this country, and you got to pay your taxes. And if it's a green light, you can go. If it's a red light, stop, okay? You should still pay attention to social decorum, right? And probably remember your wife's anniversary. And the fact is, there's to the extent necessary, there's some things you should focus on. But also don't do it too hypervigilant. What happens when we do that? We develop issues as well. And so put the right amount of effort in. And I love to visualize it like this. If you try to put too much effort in, because I want to hurry up and get enlightened. You know, I want to hurry up and get to step 8 of the Eightfold Path. That's the ego. It's trying to control the time in which this will happen. And just that right there. You just lost it. In the moment we judge someone else, that's why these teachings are so pure, why compassion is so important. Other people are doing this whether they know it or not. Your judgment of them doesn't help you or them, okay? And that's a lot of right intention, okay? The ability, the desire to spread this throughout the world requires doing it to the extent necessary. If you do it too much and you start telling other people, well, you know what? You need to get to that little pink spot in your heart, okay? Stop worried about whether or not the Steelers got a new quarterback. That's no fun. But at the same time, don't be slothful. Don't sit back and do nothing either. In each case, what we're doing is the story of the 3 bears, too hot and too cold. What we want to do is just right, and just right is to the extent necessary.